The fifth president of Georgia, Salome Zourabichvili, still considers herself to be a head of state. Why? She told DW in an interview during the Warsaw Security Forum. Zourabichvili also explained what is there in common between Georgia and Moldova. Are the Georgians afraid of a new Russian invasion? And what prevented her from issuing pardon to the former president, Mikheil Kavelashvili? Madam President, welcome to the interview.
Thank you.
First question is, do you still consider yourself to be legally the head of state of Georgia, Sakartvelo?
Yes, I'm the only one carrying the legitimacy of a general election that has not been disputed. Since then, the parliamentary elections were stolen in a way that now everybody recognizes how it could happen because of Moldova, and hence thereafter the parliament that was issued from these elections was not recognized, and to this day people are protesting on the streets this non-legitimate parliament, and it's the parliament that elected or designated, because there was only one party, the current the president. The people call him the president of Georgian Dream. Mm-hmm. So there has to be someone. It's not a question of having an alternate power, because that's not the case, but it's a question of having someone that does represent the will of the people, and the will of the people that was this European path that has been taken away from Georgia after the statement of the Prime Minister 1 month after the elections.
We'll come back to the European path of Georgia, but you mentioned the protests. There seem to be pretty much weekly protests in different Georgian cities, especially in Tbilisi, of course.
Daily.
Well, yeah, quite a lot of them. But it seems that the government is very successfully ignoring them, and the majority of the population, at least away from the major urban centers, is completely indifferent. Why so? Is it because people are tired of politics? Is it because maybe the economic situation in Georgia objectively is not that bad?
No, the economic situation is very bad and is getting worse because of the reality that we are isolated. Most of the bilateral programs have been suspended by now of our partners.
You mean with especially the European nations, right?
Especially Europeans, but also American, USAID, which was very important for sustaining the Georgian health, education, and agriculture has also been suspended. No, I think that what was true on the day of the elections is even more true today, which is because those elections were de facto won by the opposition. It's still true that the very vast majority of Georgia is pro-European, does not agree with what is the capture of our future by Russia and by those that implement Russian policies. But not everybody knows what they can really do, and 305 days on the streets is not something that everybody can be part of. Of course,
people are getting tired. They can't do it every day.
The activist part of the society that is doing that. And of course, the ruling party has been crushing the protest in many different manners. Fines for people that are on the streets, excessively high amounts of fines that have been imposed, but also jobs in a country where there are no alternate jobs. If you lose your public service job,
especially you work for the government in some way,
and most of the people's, more than 60%. So if one person works there, it's the whole family. So there are many different ways, but that doesn't mean that the pro-European, very vast majority that exists since the 90s in Georgia has disappeared. And that doesn't mean that the ruling party doesn't have its own internal, very acute problems, because by now they are not only arresting the opposition leaders, And it's important to know that most of the opposition parties' leaders are in jail currently, but at the same time they're also arresting their own ministers, one after the other, for high corruption.
Well, people will say, wonderful, they're arresting the people that are corrupt. Why not?
That's not what people say, because people know. And people say, well, they have been making such huge amounts, because it's sums of hundreds of millions of dollars. So Georgia is becoming a gray zone where all kinds of trafficking, all kinds of corruption, all kinds of circumvention of sanctions, and that is not something that the Georgian population likes, because they were very confident in the fact that not only they were on the European path, but they were building a state that could sustain independence, and that's what they see going away.
Very briefly, you mentioned that Georgia is sort of helping Russia to, as far as I understood, to dodge sanctions. Could you give, well, kind of an example from what you see probably from the inside?
Well, it's very difficult to know all the details in the implications that exist. There is one example that is known because it's very visible, that all kinds of luxury cars transit through Georgia, and it has been exponential, the imports, and then the exports, which are supposed to go to Turkmenistan or Kazakhstan, and in fact, once the border is crossed, those luxury cars that are sanctioned stay in Russia. And what is on board of those cars is another story. So that's something visible, but it's not saying anything about all the money flows that go through Georgia, how the cryptocurrency is used.
The EU is considering the possibility of lifting the visa-free regime that existed since 2016 for Georgia, as well as for Moldova and Ukraine. So what would be your advice to European policymakers to cancel the visa-free thing for the Georgians or not?
The advice would be first to recognize that Georgia is a testing ground for Russian strategies, whether it's military aggression or hybrid aggression. Once you recognize that the elections were a result of this hybrid strategy. It's not enough to be satisfied that Moldova made it this time, but it's also a need to recognize that what happened in Georgia was exactly that. And at that time, I remember people were asking me, well, can you prove that there was Russian interference? Well, you do not prove that unless there is a partnership with European intelligence, with information, with all kinds of exchange of information. So there should be more attention to that. And if we agree on the fact that those elections were stolen from the Georgian people, then it's not enough that there is a ruling party that is in the hands of Moscow to accept and to defer to that ruling party and to say, well, we suppress the visas, because then that means that without firing a bullet, Russia obtains in Georgia what it cannot obtain after 3.5 years in Ukraine.
So you suggest that Europe keeps the visa-free regime for Georgia?
I understand all the discussions about the fact that they have no other instrument, that without consensus they are not able to do anything else. But I don't think that the population that for so many years has been showing with protests on the streets of Georgia, not only this last year uninterrupted, but when the Russian law was first adopted, the second Russian law, and
you meaning the law about foreign agents and
yes,
reporting?
Each time there was something that was taking Georgia away from the path. So why punish the people and not those that are responsible?
Lots of people say that the real master of Georgia, the real ruler of Georgia, is President Zourabichvili, the founder of the Georgian Dream, former prime minister. Is it truly so? Is he the one who takes all the main decisions in Georgia today.
It's even more so. Because by now there is nobody left in the ruling party from the original ruling party that came in 2012, which was a loose coalition of different political parties and political individuals. From this original Georgian Dream, there is nobody left except for the Prime Minister today. And yesterday's ministers are one by one going to jail. And there is only one person that decides behind the scene, is not actually coming very often outside in the limelight. But everybody knows that there is no decision that is taken outside.
That's why I'm asking, because he seems to be invisible. Everyone is talking about him, but he's invisible. What is this? Is it his fortune? Where does this influence come from, if you wish?
Well, this influence comes from the fact that he has all the reins in hands, that he's obviously now the man through which Moscow's instructions or policies come through, and that there is nobody else that has any legitimacy or any power or any charisma or any personal position in the government around him. So they're changing, he's changing prime ministers, Minister of Interior, Minister of Security Affairs, Minister of Economy. He has changed approximately everyone, and the only one that stays is...
You mentioned forces of order, police, there's prosecution, so on and so forth. It seems like the Georgian Dream is in complete control of the police and the prosecution. How so?
And the courts.
I heard about not salary increases, but I also heard about, for example, audience may not know, like loans in banks which are given to people that serve and say the police force with, let's say, minimal interest. Is it true?
Yeah. That's one of the ways of controlling people, not only with minimal interest, with zero interest sometimes for some ministers. And if they start not being in the line, then they're asked to repay. And currently there are people that have been asked to come back and bring money. You know, Georgia is a small country, and everybody knows everyone or somebody from the family of. So there are many, many things that, of course, are not proven on paper, not documented, but that you hear because there is little, and maybe that's the reason why Mr. Ivanishvili is hiding in his home and not coming out and not having any interaction with groups of the society, because everything after a while gets to be known.
You mentioned sanctions breaking, so it enriches someone, sanctions busting. What are other ways of, let's say, other channels of Russian influence in Georgia?
Russian influence in Georgia goes through the Georgian Dream leaders, and especially the one leader that takes all the decisions, through the propaganda channels, through the governmental televisions channels, through small groups that are financed from Moscow, of Georgiano-Russian groups, cultural, like they do in different countries, what one would call soft power. Of course, they control also indirectly the call centers that were actively used during the elections and that are used for the bots and for using the social networks, where they are very heavily also present, and of course money, because they can buy many things in a country that is where the level of middle salaries is low. It's very easy to buy. It's very easy for Mr. Ivanishvili with his own fortune, but it's also easy for intermediaries from Russia to buy either votes or people for different of their influences.
Coming back to a presidency and the fact that you still say that you have a legitimate authority invested in you by people. Looking back, I must ask you that, do you regret not giving pardon to Mikheil Kavelashvili in after 2021?
I couldn't, anyway.
You have presidential powers of pardon.
No, because he had many sentencings that were one after the other. They had everything very well planned, and some of the sentences are currently not even completely finished. So they are these Damocles swords in a row hanging over him. So he wouldn't have come out anyway out of jail.
Well, but if you did it symbolically,
Well, symbolically,
you could heal a lot of rifts in Georgian society.
on the
no?
contrary, on the contrary.
Why?
Why? Because the country is divided. Not today so much, because today he's probably one of the political prisoners like the others, and there is a kind of unity of the opposition. But at that time it was not true. And there is a part of the society, and that has been used by the Georgian Dream, there is a part of the society that very strongly resents those years of the authoritarian drifting, and that would not have accepted that as a reconciliation gesture.
But now you mentioned the term political prisoner. He is a political prisoner in your view, right? So no one's going to pardon him in current circumstances, right?
Nobody is going to pardon anyone. We have 60 prisoners, some political, some conscience prisoners, and they are not going to be pardoned by this regime. Everybody is in the same boat, I would say, and it's only a change of the regime that would allow things to go back to a normal democratic system.
You know, a Georgian friend of mine said to me, he is, from President Saakashvili, is the personal prisoner of Putin these days, personal political prisoner of Putin today. Do you agree?
That I don't know, but I would say that all the prisoners are personal prisoners. Georgia is a personal prisoner of Putin. It is Putin that is today capturing Georgian states, Georgian citizens, and the European future of Georgia. So hence you can deduct everything.
But how is it happening? Tell me. You say that people are pro-European, but they let this capture, as you described it, happen.
They didn't let. It was stolen. It was stolen. I can tell you how they let. When, after having vetoed all the pro-Russian laws for the last year of my mandate, and started earlier to protest many of the, between the attempt to impeach me and the elections, there was not a single visit by the European Union to Georgia to show the support to our democracy, to our European path. There was not what Moldova received as a support. We were alone, and we were alone in circumstances in which gradually there was a takeover by this pro-Russian Georgian Dream, while the rest, the population and myself as a counterpower, I didn't have any executive powers. There was no ways in which we could.
That was actually my next question. Do you think you could do more?
I couldn't have. That's the main problem. Everything that Maya Sandu has been doing very courageously, she has been doing in the framework of her powers, which is she had the police at her hand, she had the justice at her hand, she had the capacity to open pressings in the diaspora and to keep them open. We didn't have any of that. I could open one precinct in the diaspora. We have 1 million out of 4 million Georgians living abroad, and there were 17,000 that were allowed to vote. And we couldn't do anything about it. So we didn't have the means. The people were there, and they showed it, and they were on the streets, and they resisted all the violence, and they are still there. Those that have the physical or the resources to go out and do it. And I think that we will see many people on the streets in the coming days. We will surprise you still.
We've seen messages by officials of the Georgian Dream, like Prime Minister Kobachidze, saying, well, if you want a war like in Ukraine, it will happen if you basically continue to oppose Russia, essentially, if you don't follow our path. Georgia has seen Russian invasion in 2008. Does it work with the people, this message? Are they really afraid that Russian tanks will roll in? Putin is not that far.
Well, Prime Minister Kobakhidze is not saying that Russian tanks will run into Georgia. What he's saying...
Zelensky is to blame for the war.
And that the US and the Europeans wanted to start a second front. And that has not worked very well, because Georgians remember who starts each and every war against Georgia since 1801. So that doesn't work. Now, the propaganda about war and peace in general, whether you want peace, that of course to a certain extent works, but it works in Poland, it works in France, it works through the social networks, it works everywhere because it affects something that of course everybody wants peace. So if you tell them every day that something might ruin their wish for peace, some part of the population is going to believe it. But what is more interesting, because this propaganda is very active, is the similarity, and that's something that as a journalist you can go and look for, is that the statements of the Prime Minister and of the President of the Parliament are exactly a copycat of statements by Mr. Peskov, by the spokeswoman of the Kremlin, or by Medvedev or any of the Russian leaders. So they are just walking hand in hand.
What we've seen in the last months, year, 2 years, is essentially both neighbors of Georgia in South Caucasus, Armenia and Azerbaijan. Different speeds, different types of political change, but still both countries are essentially turning away from Russia. What kind of impact will this have on Georgia, if any impact at all?
I think it's very important because the Caucasus, after all, is one region, even if we have seen these conflicts that prevented the region to form itself as a coherent and stable region. So it's a very important step towards real peace in that case. So very important for the role of the Caucasus in general in the region. The reason why Russia is less active against Armenia, where it has many possibilities to act, is that it's today thinking that it holds Georgia. And for the same reason that Russia considers that by keeping Georgia under its hand, it can prevent the whole of the region to go in its own independent way. That is the same reason why Europe should be more concerned about not letting go of Georgia, because everybody, all the Russians knew from the 18th century that who holds Tbilisi holds the region. And all the projects of a stronger European Union, of enlargement, but also of a stronger economically European Union, goes through a stable Black Sea, a stable Caucasus, and the links to Central Asia. So one cannot lose Georgia, and we are not ready to lose it, but we need some friends.
China will replace both America and the EU and Russia potentially, if it thinks that it controls Georgia, as the chief economic and maybe political partner of Georgia. Could it happen?
Chinese are in some of the infrastructural, and that's also a challenge for the European Union, because most of the money that was devoted to this infrastructural came from European banks, European Investment Bank, and they come without strings attached to the least offer. And of course, in that competition, Chinese know how to provide for very low. So I think that we need there too a more coherent European policy, and of course also pressures to prevent what has not yet happened, that the main port on the Black Sea, the main future port on the Black Sea, goes into the hands of the Chinese.
Salome Zourabichvili, Didi Madloba, thanks a million for the interview.
Thank you.